Hey guys, first regardsman here. I'll be talking about Space Marine 3 and which characters are going to show up in the campaign for this game, potentially the operations as well, and more importantly, if we will see the Primarch Rabute Gilliman appear in the video game. And to talk about this with me, I have brought on Jefficus once again. Now, Jeff, we are slowly approaching Space Marine 3. I think next year we'll be getting some major info drops on like actual gameplay for this thing, maybe like the Warhammer Skulls in 2027. What are your thoughts on the character appearances in this game?
Oh, I think that Robuta Gilliman is definitely going to appear in Space Marine 3. We've already seen Games Workshop allow Dawn of War 4 and their developers King Art Games to use the Lion, the Primarch of the Dark Angels, to appear in that game. And I feel like the next logical step in the progression of character reveals after dropping the Ultramarines Chapter Master Calgar on us would be to just throw the Ultramarines Primarch at us, to throw Rabuta Gilliman in there. And also, I think that the stakes in Space Marine 3 are going to be higher than ever. And it's going to warrant, or the story is going to warrant, Rabuta Gilliman himself stepping in to help Captain Titus solve whatever that conflict or problem is going to be. I'm hoping that, of course, we see Necrons. I'm hoping that something like the Silent King is portrayed in Space Marine 3, but it could be any number of threats.
I definitely agree that after Calcar appeared in Space Marine 2, we are almost certainly going to see Rabute Gilliman show up in Space Marine 3. And we've also seen them kind of set up portions of this story in the tabletop for Warhammer 40k, where we saw the release of 500 Worlds, where Titus is now the Warden of Ultramar. He is basically tasked with making sure that the reconquered territories of Ultramar, that they are secure. And we also had a Necron Scourge Plague guy in the tabletop for that. So I think they are really trying to push us towards having like the major Xenos factions here beyond what we saw in Space Marine 2, because Space Marine 2, like for all intents and purposes, it was a pretty small scale campaign. I mean, it was like one Tzeentchian wizard that wanted to basically just trap Calgar in the warp. Like that was actually like the major plot of that story beyond the Titus stuff. And I think Space Marine 3 will have a lot more to do with the overall setting, and especially the Primarchs, because Rabute Gilliman, he is like the de facto ruler of the Imperium at this point, with the Emperor on the Golden Throne and the High Lords of Terra kind of like losing to him in Watchers of the Throne as a book.
Yeah, and I think that we're going to continue to see this with other Warhammer 40k games as well. But I think that when it comes to Space Marine 3 specifically, a lot of people are looking forward to potentially playing in the 500 world setting, not just because it's a miniatures line or kind of a not a mini game of the actual tabletop game, but a sub game or an addition, an expansion of the tabletop game. But it's also something that is kind of reminiscent of Helldivers 2, where people think about like the possibilities of Space Marine 3 having this multi-world campaign where you're fighting on various planets. In Space Marine 2, you only fight on 3 planets total, and on Space Marine 1, you only fought on 1 planet. So I'm curious to see if Saber and Focus would be ambitious enough to expand the scope of the game of Space Marine 3 to encompass 500 worlds. That would just be absolutely insane. But if they changed the gameplay loop up enough, and if they had the tech working for them, for example, AI or procedurally generated content, then I think they could 100% make it work. And it might be an amicable solution to being able to support Space Marine 2 and Space Marine 3 at the same time if they're drastically different experiences in that way.
I think the scale of Space Marine 3 is definitely being set up through both just the general sales of Space Marine 2, giving me a huge indicator of how much money is going to be poured into that game, and also the tabletop, where we see that 500 Worlds was where we got the reveal the Lion was going to talk to Rabute Gilliman. The Lion will also be present in Dawn of War 4, and we also know from a prior Saber community poll that there will be other chapters of Space Marines beyond the Ultramarines present in Space Marine 3. They actually directly asked the community which one they would like to see, and I'm pretty sure we will see Dark Angels and potentially even Blood Ravens, who at this point are probably a Dark Angel successor chapter with like the lions showing up in Dawn of War 4, like I mentioned before.
Oh, I hope so.
And this kind of brings me to something I want to talk about with the 500 Worlds, is that 500 Worlds is greatly misunderstood by the community because the trailer for 500 Worlds did not properly convey the information of what Titus's job actually is here. Titus himself is not tasked with reconquering the 500 worlds. His job is as a warden of Ultramar. So we have other successor chapters like the Doom Eagles and things like that. They are helping out with conquering worlds, and Rabute Gilliman himself is spearheading this, and Titus's job is to maintain the already conquered worlds. So we could see the 500 worlds as like, map options similar to Helldivers, like you said in Space Marine 3, but Titus's job is as the warden, and like that is the major discrepancy there. He's not actually like on the offensive for this.
Yeah, well, I guess we'll see what his role in the story is going to be. He's obviously going to be in the story because his face is on the freaking poster, the cover of Space Marine 3. And he's also he's basically the Master Chief of Warhammer 40k at this point. A lot of people will see Lieutenant or now Captain Titus and they'll go, oh yeah, he's the guy in the Space Marine game. Well, yeah, because he's the freaking Master Chief of this entire franchise now. He's the face of Warhammer 40k, whether you like it or not.
Even back in like 2000, whenever, like 2008, when the original Space Marine game 2007 dropped, when I saw it in the store as a kid, like that was just the face of Warhammer 40k for me. Like I didn't know the tabletop that much until like 2010, and at the time, Titus, I was like, oh, Warhammer 40k, it's that blue guy on the cover, and like now that is even more true for like a lot of the new players to 40k. That Titus, he is John Warhammer.
Oh, yeah.
He is just Master Chief of Warhammer 40k, and to say he's not is just kind of insane. And he will absolutely be the playable character of Space Marine 3. He's on the fucking cover, guys. Like I've seen people ask me this. He is on the cover. It is insane to say that Titus will not be the playable character in Space Marine 3. And this brings me to another point I want to talk about, which are the other characters we'll be seeing here, which are almost certainly going to be Gadriel, again from Space Marine 2, and Sergeant Matoras, who was introduced as the guy who basically brought Titus as a kid into the Ultramarines chapter. So what do you think about that?
I think that it's probably easier for them, and just to, I guess if anybody has not heard, so they actually are killing Chiron, and I don't even, who's the current captain of
Captain
the second
Akaran
company?
is dead.
Captain Akaran, oh
Or
my
Captain
gosh.
Akaran.
Yeah, poor, not very memorable Captain Akaran, who is now dead and is effectively going to be replaced yet again by Captain
Mark X
Titus.
Hatticus.
Yes.
Mark X armor instead of Phobos, yep. Oh, he
Oh,
died.
yep,
Should have
yep.
worn the proper armor.
Should have worn the proper armor. The fool. Should have worn Terminator gear. Why
Really,
wouldn't
yeah.
you just do that? But yeah, so they've killed both these characters off screen, so obviously they're not going to be appearing. And this does raise the general question of, like, are they going to introduce like Gene Stealer cults to the setting? Because Gene Stealer cults were the ones who killed Captain Acheron and Chiron, but I don't think so. Mostly because like they probably were just looking for a unique Xenos race that they can kind of throw together in a quick short story or blurb to explain why these characters won't be appearing. They just used the Gene Stealer cults to do that because they didn't want to just do more Tyranids. I think that for the most part, like you said, playable characters, Sergeant Matoras, Gadriel, and Captain Titus, those are going to be your three playable characters. But I do think, and I speculate this because Saber and Focus released a survey not too long ago asking the community, hey, what are your favorite Space Marine chapters? And this is basically them alluding to, hey, what do you want to see in Space Marine 3 and in other Space Marine games? And I guarantee you that the winners of that survey, aka the Black Templars, probably the Blood Angels, and the Dark Angels, they will probably have characters featured in Space Marine 3. These characters are going to be really important, and I believe that these characters may get spin-off games of their own, because I don't see Titus continuing to be kind of the prominent playable figure in other Space Marine games that are focused on other chapters such as the Black Templars or Blood Angels or Dark Angels.
Now, I've seen some people ask about this, like whether or not we'll see more campaign DLC in Space Marine 2. Focus has come out and said there's no campaign DLC for Space Marine 2 planned at all. Their focus is almost entirely on operations and like a little bit of PvP at this point. But as far as like the story of Titus is concerned, that will only be continued in Space Marine 3. I think Space Marine 3 is very much setting us up for a far larger scale story, like we mentioned before, and that Titus is now a captain. His job is significantly different than it was in Space Marine 2, where like he doesn't have the overhead that he used to on like, Captain Akron telling him like, oh, we can only spare 3 guys for this. That's his job now. And also we saw with the Necrons in the 500 Worlds box set that I really do think the new factions in Space Marine 3 will be Necrons and Tyranids again, maybe Thousand Sons expand a bit, but the obvious choice is like Tyranids and Necrons because these are the two Xenos factions that are heavily featured in 40k tabletop and lore at the moment, especially in regards to like Rabute Gilliman and just the Imperium in general. And I would also say that we'll probably see a third Chaos faction there, maybe Thousand Sons again. I don't know. They'd have to be pretty greatly improved, but I think a lot of the fears around having Thousand Sons or Necrons, like, oh, they're these super tanky range guys, that'd be awful to fight. The only reason it's awful to fight in Space Marine 2 is because the range combat loop of Space Marine 2 kind of sucks, and that's not necessarily going to be true in Space Marine 3, because if they do dramatically improve the feedback loop of range combat against these enemies, it could be a significantly superior experience for players, and even though these are range-focused factions, range combat does not inherently suck. So that's my thoughts on that.
Not only that, but I feel like you can see with the new Terminus enemy being added to Space Marine 2, the Sorcerer, the Exalted Sorcerer, the animations for this character are really top notch. They're the next level. And I think that we're seeing more and more of this with each new boss or each new enemy type that they make for Space Marine 2. And it's starting to look a bit more lively when it comes to the Chaos Space Marine side. So I personally would not be surprised if we saw Black Legion being introduced with things like Chaos Spawn and other sorts of demon enemies being the prominent melee figures that we have to deal with whenever we're fighting them. Or maybe even, of course, Khorne Berserkers, which would be phenomenal. But I think that they've kind of taken a lot of the lessons that they learned in Space Marine 2 over time. They're starting to apply them in Space Marine 2. Let's just hope that they apply them in Space Marine 3 as well.
Well, as we've talked about before, Space Marine 2 has accounted for an absurd amount of revenue for the company. They have a massive cash influx coming in for Space Marine 3, and as a result, I think the game's scale is going to be larger, not just story, but gameplay, obviously. And because of that, the factions we get in this one will be far more intricate. The enemies will probably be far more intricate as well, and we also have the backlog of enemies. If we bring Tyranids back, we don't have to completely change the lictor around. All we have to do is incorporate what we already have on the lictors in the game, and then expand upon that. And same thing for Thousand Sons, same things for like the Chaos Spawn, also any bosses we decide to add in again, because we see in games like Dark Souls that Dark Souls 1, the great swords in Dark Souls 1, we still see those movesets all the way into Elden Ring. I don't see anybody complaining about having a great sword moveset in Elden Ring because it was fun back then, it was fun like 10 years ago, it's still fun now, and games are all about building on the previous iterations. And in this case, I think a lot of the enemies in Space Marine 2 are very well made. I think we had a Scarab Occult Terminator Sorcerer like we have in the upcoming patch 14 in Space Marine 3. I don't think players are going to complain about getting to fight that enemy again, as long as they get new stuff on top of that.
Exactly, dude. And I think the last thing that I'll say about this subject is probably going to be a little bit of a hot take when it comes to the speculation side of things. But Games Workshop loves to tease us. And a while back, they released a little image, a snippet of the Lion sending a transmission directly to Rabute Gilman stating, "Brother, we need to talk." And I think that this is actually set up for Space Marine 3. I think Space Marine 3 is not only going to be a sequel to Space Marine 2, but I also think that it's kind of going to be a soft sequel to Dawn of War 4 and wherever the story ends in that game. I think that we are probably going to see the Lion stop by Cronus in Dawn of War 4 on his way to seeing Rabute Gilliman in Space Marine 3. Because what's better than having one Primarch appear in your game? Having two Primarchs appear in your game.
And pulling in both the fan bases of Dark Angels and Ultramarines. Yeah, that sounds like a
Hell
pretty
yeah.
cool thing to see.
Uh,
Get the video game cinematic universe going for these games. I think
yep.
that's honestly a great place to stop on this conversation. The fact that I just think that having these games come out back to back like this, where we're gonna get Dawn of War 4, and we'll probably get Total War 40k, and then we'll probably get Space Marine 3 in like 2029 because the game does have a 4-year dev cycle. But as far as my final thoughts are concerned for Space Marine 3, I think the game will be substantially larger, substantially better content additions both on the launch and post-launch, and probably substantially better balance on launch as well, since I imagine they're working really hard to make sure the game is super fun and playable, and it'll probably have NTX, but that's a different conversation for a different day. But thank you for coming on to talk about this with me, Jeff. If you guys have not subscribed to Jefficus, you should. He makes great Warhammer 40k content for games like Space Marine 2, Dawn of War 4, and certainly the upcoming Total War 40k. And if you have not subbed to me, you should do that as well. And as always, guys, thank you for watching. Take it easy. Bye.